I'm your host, Effie Pilarino, and today I have the pleasure to have a digital human with us. And everybody, of course, knows Chris Skinner. He doesn't need any introduction. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Effie. How are you?
I am good. Is it a cold, crispy day over there?
Yeah, here just outside Warsaw. We've got lots of snow and it's quite slippy. And I know you're in Switzerland, which is fresh, but not quite so snowed in.
It's not. It's not. We did have some fresh snow here in Fribourg, in the center of Switzerland, but it's sunny and I think it's going to melt away. You know, Chris, it was funny the other day on Twitter. There was this Fintech list, you know, of influencers, and you were not included, and that there were some of uh, people that were not included in the list really complaining, how come Chris was not on the list? And I think that, you know, you are the most sort of missed from this list, which tells a lot about what social media is doing. Because, of course, you are one of the most recognized fintech influencers in the true meaning. And it brings me to ask you the question. You, your impact, your influence is through books and blogs and the power of the word. Unless you disagree with that, I really want to ask you how you feel this power of the word. Is it underrated, overrated? How do you think it works in the fintech world?
Well, again, it's interesting, and I see lots of lists, some of which have me at the top, some of which have me at the bottom, some of which completely miss me out. And a lot of the reason for the uh, variance is because I write, and blogs are not included in most social media influencer lists. It's purely how many Twitter followers and LinkedIn connections you have. Whereas I'm far more focused on writing as a discipline and making an argument or provocation to affect change. And I think that a lot of people tell me, so I'm not saying it's what I think, it's more people tell me that the stance I take, the radical questions I ask, makes me a person who challenges the institutions but doesn't try and upset them. I try and provoke them into change as someone who's a troublemaker, which is actually the title that I use for myself. I'm just a troublemaker in finance.
Great. I think this is very important, especially now that we see Anderson Horowitz, you know, announcing publicly that they want to become a media company, and we'll be seeing more VCs launching online media companies. This is a very interesting shift in the market and during this time, because obviously it's the power of the world. You know, I read your Digital Human book, and today, since we were going to meet, I wanted to look at when it was published and, you know, infer when you wrote it, because honestly, I hadn't looked at that. So it seems that it was published in 2018. So you wrote it a year before, 2017. So it's already 3+ years old, right? And I want to pick a couple of points because they're so timely, you know, 3-4 years after writing this, and with all this change that of course nobody could have predicted or expected, and its impact. And I'm picking apart that you write about the cash being dirty. Do you remember that part?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've spent all my life professionally doing is trying to look at where technology is taking us next. rather than talking about today or yesterday, because you can't change today or yesterday, but you can change tomorrow. And so, you know, I won't say that I predicted everything, but a lot of the things that we talk about today, like banking as a service, banking as a service, I wrote about in 2008, and now it's the big deal 12 years later. I would claim to actually being the first to use the phrase banking as a service. Equally, I, 5 years ago was saying that blockchain will not take off in the near term. It'll take at least a decade or more before blockchain in production systems starts to have an impact in finance and government. And I still think it's 5 years away. So it's really trying to address what's obvious based on technological change. And cash in particular, it's obvious that it's going to eventually diminish in usage. It won't necessarily die. I talk mainly about a less cash future rather than a cashless future, because there's parts of society that still depend on cash. But that part of society that depends on cash is getting smaller and smaller. And those who have been used to using cash are now moving very rapidly away from using cash, particularly because of the pandemic, because they've been told that cash is dirty, which it is. It doesn't necessarily spread coronavirus, but it does have a lot of human waste on those banknotes, which, to be honest, you shouldn't really be touching. So, digital payments, contactless payments, online payments is going to be the future, and it's already here.
Let me read this paragraph because really, I mean, that you wrote this 4 years ago. It says, cash is dirty. And here I'm talking literally. Often cash has been in contact with human emissions that are undesirable. If you are not already aware, 94% of US dollar bills are contaminated with bacteria, including some that can cause pneumonia, blood infections, diarrhea, and urinary tract and respiratory system infections. In addition, research revealed that the flu virus can survive up to 17 days on banknotes when accompanied by mucus, and 4 out of 5 banknotes have traces of cocaine and other drugs. Just amazing reading it today. So, I mean, we all suffered, and we know that 2020 is going to go down as the year of the coronavirus pandemic. And then the question comes, are you fearing for the next virus that might be a digital virus and that might attack our digital life as a digital human? Is that something that crosses your mind as we more and more become digital? And how do you see that fear?
Sure, sure. I mean, I actually have just written a blog about, do we rely too much on technology? Because when technology doesn't work, we're completely up the creek without a paddle. And we've seen that when Visa and MasterCard systems have gone down, albeit for only a short time. But when that does happen, it creates a huge media outcry because people can't pay for groceries, diesel, their daily needs. And so, the payments network, particularly the financial network, is integral to our lives. And the more it moves into automation and digitalization, the more it has to be, not 99.99% uptime. It has to be 100% uptime, and that's the challenge, particularly when you have so many parties that want to disrupt systems, particularly between nations. And cyber attacks and hacks are happening almost every day. Although what's interesting, when you look at cybersecurity and the criminals who try and attack systems, again, it's not every case, but it's certainly 9 out of 10 cases is much more due to social engineering than systems engineering. The systems are mainly robust and resilient, particularly in finance, but the weakness is when one of the employees gets scammed or duped, or believes that someone's talking to them who's in authority or who they have to share information with. And so that's the real weakness. It's the humans in the process. And we just need to have more and more ways of keeping up. And what's interesting, again, going back to fraud and security, Nearly every head of fraud I've met within a bank says there's an acceptable level of loss. And as long as we don't go above the acceptable level of losses, we're comfortable. So the bank is just trying to stay one step ahead of the criminals. Every now and again, a criminal gets slightly ahead, but as long as they're not too far ahead, then the bank's comfortable with it.
Well, let's see when and if central banks digitize completely, whether it's some retail or wholesale central bank digital currency, what kind of concerns they will have, for cybersecurity, right? That's another big
But if you
topic.
put it in another context, Ali, I mean, you know, going into a bank branch with a gun in the olden days got you the money. These days, you go through the website to get the money if you can. And in many ways, it's probably more secure now because you don't have that ability to walk into somewhere with a gun.
That's true. That's true. I I want to address a bit and touch upon the very important topic of digital identity. And for me, the interest is in self-sovereign digital identity, because really, I believe that unless we solve that or scale that, we will never be able to get the next generation of the web going, because I think that's an essential part of it. Whether you believe that some blockchain kind of technology will power the next generation of the web or not doesn't matter, but digital identity, self-sovereign digital identity is important. And I know you have touched upon it in the Digital Human book. I have not read your Value Web book. I don't know if you talk about it there. How do you see that, and where do you see the probability that it starts scaling? Is it Africa? Because it's definitely not the developed world in the West that will get this ball rolling.
Yeah, I mean, digital identity is really going to be at the heart of the next generation of society. And one thing I do talk a lot about is the United Nations Sustainable Goals for 2030, of which goal number 16 is around societies that provide equality and inclusion. And specifically, 16.9 is issuing a legal identity for everyone on planet Earth. And right now, there's something nearing 2 billion people who don't have a legal identity. And then there's another 1.5 billion plus that are being abused and have their identities stolen or destroyed. There's actually a new report that just came out the other day in the UK about slavery and human trafficking. And the key thing that happens as soon as you get somebody into the system of human trafficking, you destroy their identity documents and then they become no one. And that's a critical issue. And so in Africa, they have been experimenting in quite a few countries now with using the mobile phone with a biometric and a distributed ledger technology to create a legal identity for all citizens in a number of countries from Somalia through Sudan. And those experiments are trials. They haven't taken off yet. And I think the biggest issue is trying to create some global identity system that all governments could buy into, because with the pre-pandemic travel that we had and the mixture of races and movements of migrants, um, you know, post-pandemic, we really need a better way of tracking and identifying individuals. Now, there's a backlash to that because I'm living in a Central European, Eastern European country that most of those countries like Czech Republic, Romania, Bulgaria and others had identity systems before they had freedom, and they don't like having the government identifying them all the time. So there's a balance there between a digital identity and privacy. And that's the real argument for the next decade around how do we balance the needs of government to track and trace people, particularly if they have a virus, versus the privacy of the individual.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, we're far away from a world where every person at birth gets a digital wallet, so to speak, that is basically a self-sovereign way to have an identity and keep it for life. who knows what will
I,
happen.
I like the, the proposition put forward by David Birch on this one, who's the authority for me in digital identity and all things digital identity related, in that his view is that we will have personas that we can release on demand to authorities and institutions, but we will never share our full identity because we own that. And so decentralized, self-sovereign digital identity is definitely the way to go. And then the issuance of a anonymized version of that data on an as needed basis is a much better way of thinking about the future.
Yeah, there's one project out of the UK, the Pillar Project, that David Siegel seeded and now is out there, whose vision is exactly to do that. So you can basically share exactly the piece of data that is needed, and it's in a zero knowledge kind of fashion where they can validate the data but not really take the data. But we are far away from that. Chris, before we wrap up our conversation, I wanted to ask you, you're not traveling anymore. And in all your books, I see, that you're weaving your travel experiences with your field, finance field experiences. So how are you operating in this new reality? And what's up your sleeve? Is it another book? What can we expect from you in 2021?
Well, I've been obviously not leaving the house for almost a year. I'm in Poland, and to be honest, in February, my travel arrangements started to be postponed and cancelled, and then everything, like everyone else, became a lockdown. Um, and I don't have much reason to leave the house, if I'm honest, because I don't speak Polish. Unfortunately, I've got a few basic words, but there's therefore no motivation for me to go out and do anything other than sit here and write and think. And so that's what I've been doing, a lot of writing and thinking. I'm still doing my blog every day. I've got 2 business books that are bubbling towards fruition. I hope to have them completed by the summertime and released in spring 2022. And then I've got 2 little boys who entertain me endlessly, and I've been writing a lot of children's books.
Oh, great. Amazing. So
And I'll tell you more about that in March when it's official.
great, great. I mean, and the last word that I think is worthy touching upon is this issue. It's a social issue that I know you've written a lot about, which is, the people that are in their 60s today are like the people, in their, I don't know, 25, 30, whatever it is. So this has profound implications for finance and for society. Of course, as money is the core of our life in many different ways, even in emotional ways. How do you see this playing out? Have we really realized this? And are we building technology and businesses that are addressing this big social shift?
And that's a pretty complicated question because there's so many pockets of society that are different. No 2 customers are the same, which is why we need to personalize and individualize the experience to each and every client. And equally, banks unfortunately tend to treat their mass customer, their mass affluent customer in particular, as the same, and their needs being the same. And yet some mass affluent customers really enjoy going into a branch and having a face-to-face conversation pre-pandemic. Some never want to go into a branch and never want to see anybody in a bank. They just want to deal with it in an app. Others want to have the mixture of physical and digital access. And so, the key thing I'm talking about today is forget omni-channel. We need to talk about omni-access. Omni-channel is where we layered technology on top of our old physical operations and we didn't change the operations. Omni-access refreshes the operations for a core digital platform that provides consistent experiences across every access device, whether that be access within branch or access via my telephone, or access via my television or my computer or my car or my home or my glasses or my clothes, whatever it may be, has to have a consistent digital core that provides omni access. But then equally, I think there's some tough choices that need to be taken, and that for those pockets of society that maybe are technophobes, there could be boutique bank services for that particular audience. For those who are techno natives, a different bank that's boutique for that audience. For those who are like me, enjoying remote access, but every now and again want to talk to someone on the telephone, maybe that's a different pocket of the audience. And so I think banking needs to really focus upon that. How do we provide what feels like personalized, individualized services to a mass audience?
Chris, that sounds pretty much the same as what's going on in education. We need that kind of personalization and access, and maybe in healthcare too. So it's kind of, we're seeing, these issues permeating in different sectors, in core aspects of our life, which are education, finances, and health. I mean, the way you laid out, it kind of clicked to me that is, very similar in those areas too. And I think education and health, unfortunately, are even more behind than finance. So we shouldn't feel so bad in finance, should we?
No, I mean, one of my favorite Monty Python sketches is from The Life of Brian, where Brian stands on the balcony and says, "Look, I'm not the Messiah. You're all different. You're all individual. You're all unique." And one of the guys puts his hands up and says, "I'm not."
That is fantastic. On that note, Chris, I want to thank you for being with us today, and see you soon, and maybe in person.
Take care, Ali, and enjoy the lockdown.
Okay.